Well, thank you very much, Lynn. I think one thing I hope that someone in the audience will ask you is what can this group do, or what can individuals here do to try to get as much as we can done in that legislation. Some of you old timers here like me may remember that a famous book on Southern politics by V.O. Key came out in the middle of the last century, and he was so smitten with the power of the legislature in South Carolina that he suggested that South Carolina forget the whole idea of having a separate executive and have a parliamentary system of government like the United Kingdom here in South Carolina. Our next presenter is my good friend, Lew Daly, who's working on his technical aspects of his presentation. Lew is a senior fellow at Demos. Demos is a group in New York that works nationally and around the country to improve the quality and the health of our democratic systems. Lew is currently the director of the Beyond GDP project at Demos, a project that I've been involved with him, where we're looking at, under Lew's leadership, how states and particularly and other entities, communities, can forge indicators that give a much better sense of where we are and what kind of progress we're making than this very flawed measure of GDP does. Lew is a widely published author, and one of his books that I'm very attracted to is a book called Unjust Deserts, how the rich are taking our common inheritance. And I won't explain that to you, but maybe in conversations you'll want to get the gist of Lew's thinking in conversations, and he might even talk about it. But I think he's going to talk mostly about the matter of wise and sensible indicators of where we go from here. Lew Daly.
Thank you. So, while I gather my papers here, I just invite you to, this quote has been mentioned several times yesterday from 1968, shortly before RFK died. And in many ways, it embodies the assessment that I'm going to give you today. Although, now 45 years after the fact of this statement, I'm not sure that we've made as much progress as we've needed to over those subsequent decades. Thank you, Gus. What Gus didn't mention is that he's been very instrumental in, he's basically why I'm here today. Not simply because he helped finagle me an invitation, but, I'm not saying that I'd be dead and Gus is some sort of miracle worker, but it's something close to that, actually, in terms of my own career path, my own work. Gus has been instrumental in helping me launch the Beyond GDP project at Demos, both materially and, more importantly, by his ideas and his examples. So thank you, Gus, for all of that. And thank you to the Coastal Conservation League, to Dana and Catherine and Megan and Danner, all that you've done as staff to organize this meeting, and really an inspired set of panel discussions. Mind-blowing is the word that comes to mind. And also to all the board members for what you've done to help support this organization and over its previous 25 years. It's really my honor to be here. Dana was very gracious in expressing your honor to have us here, but really I feel it's the other way around. You guys have been doing incredible work over 25 years in a difficult context, and just getting a sense of the things you're focusing on now, whether it's the cruise ships or the dredging of the harbor for the bigger container ships, or the relocalizing of the food supply, or the political issues you face. It's really a huge undertaking. I'm so impressed by what the League has done to forge what is clearly a great community of leaders, practitioners, and allies. in this work and in this struggle, which is very unique in my experience. One other thing I would point to is coming from very cosmopolitan, very diverse New York, which definitely has its virtues, as I'm sure you recognize. It's great to be in a place that has a strong local and regional culture. And maybe in 1860, someone referenced this yesterday, such a strong local culture might have been considered somewhat inimical for democracy. Today, I think it's the opposite. Having a strong local culture, a strong regional culture is indeed essential for not only democracy, but for preventing this country from continuing its slide into what can only be described as a plutocracy. So I really encourage you to keep nurturing the roots of your regional and local culture and keep working and protecting the natural beauty of this place, which is clearly God-given, as well as your God-given rights to share equally and sustainably in that great beauty. So it's a very interesting question to think of, sort of what money and politics and ethics, the kinds of things that Lynn incredibly just described, has to do with the problem of metrics. But really, if you think about it, government accountability, whether it's in terms of ethics or the pay-to-play influence system that we're stuck with today, another part of that is the challenge of what governments are providing us with in terms of basic information about our economic performance, how well we're doing as a society. Although this is sort of invisible, when you get to sort of the stage of drafting legislation and developing policy, the informational feedback we get from our metrics and our accounting systems in a technical parlance is extremely important for policy development and ultimately for political accountability. So I really do think that this is, along with the ethics and the money issues, a very, very much a core question of governance that we should be focusing on as well. I do want to put one fine point on something that was alluded to yesterday, however, before going into my main presentation. And maybe this is something we need to emphasize more. Conservation is really, I'm thinking of Gifford Pinchot, I'm thinking of Teddy Roosevelt, sort of the origins of the American conservation movement. They argue that conservation was essential, indeed almost the Archimedean point, if you will, of our democracy. Management, sustainable management, and sustainable and equitable management of resources, they argued, the founders of American conservation, is essential to our self-determination as a people. It's essential to the health of our democracy, especially if we understand that our democracy should pertain to the well-being of our people, as the preamble of our very U.S. Constitution suggests in the principle of securing the general welfare. So, I urge us to really think about that idea. And you guys are not, warm, fuzzy utopians. I think the founders of our country, even many of the great leaders of the Republican Party over the years, would have described you as patriots. So I encourage you in that moral focus. So there's basically sort of two axioms, if you will, that I use in thinking about this work of going beyond GDP. The first is the simple idea that not everything with a price has a positive value, right? This is the classic problem of negative externalities, which we first discovered in the realm of environmental externalities in the 1970s. So, for example, coal-fired electricity by market measures is very profitable. A lot of investment is driven in that direction. Capital markets like it, strictly through the lens of market measures. But actually, when you take account of the healthcare costs generated by coal-fired electricity, and there's very rigorous epidemiological research on this, including by colleagues of Gus's at Yale over the years. What you end up with, in fact, on net, is losses to our economy that are 3 to 5 times greater than the value added by that coal. Coal-fired electricity and arguably other fossil fuels are a net drag on our GDP in the very terms of conventional growth, let alone from a broader perspective. And so there's a whole range of negative externalities that are occurring in our economy and that we will have to pay for eventually out of GDP itself, and yet in the current market valuations of those activities, none of that future lost value is measured. The other side of the equation, and I think perhaps even larger in a positive way than the negative externalities are, is the idea that not everything with a positive value has a price. So the goods and services that we produce within our families, such as raising our children, taking care of our elders, huge subsidy of time and services and goods across generations that undergirds our whole social structure. This is unmeasured value because it's not transacted in any kind of market. Another example is, of course, ecosystem services, which vastly subsidize our economy, our life, our well-being in untold measures. So here you have goods and services that are essential for our economic development over time that are completely missing from the balance sheets of our growth, and as a result are not sufficiently sustained in our policy structure and in our politics. So when you start to look at what this means in terms of our society over the last, say, 30 or 40 years, what you begin to see is that there's actually been a huge gap opening up between our growth and our well-being as a country. And this can be illustrated in many ways. This is probably somewhat familiar to you in terms of the question of wage stagnation in our country is very much on people's minds. And so here you just have a simple graph that plots our GDP growth, which has basically doubled since 1980. The size of our economy has grown has doubled over the last 30 years, and yet our median individual income is much lower. It's basically flat. So despite a twofold expansion in our economy, obviously, I think we all know that has not been a twofold expansion in our wages and incomes. Here's an interesting trend where presumably if we're producing more output, maybe we could work a little less because there's more to go around and we don't have to work as much. Well, you see here that the trend is quite different, that we're working more for less. This is one sort of set of issues around sort of not just wages, but sort of the security of households. And here you have, again, the doubling of the economy, and yet a reduction in our levels of security, this in terms of retirement security. So above and beyond Social Security, our pension coverage has declined dramatically, even as our economy has doubled in size. So we're less secure, despite all the growth. This will be familiar to many of you who work on the challenges that we face in our poorer communities. Basically no progress in reducing poverty, even as the economy has doubled in size. This is a haunting one for me. This is basically showing close to a one-to-one correlation between the rate of growth and the rate of incarceration. Similarly, one-to-one correlation, more or less, between growing inequality and our growth, so that as we've grown, we've become much less equal. And this inequality question is very interesting when you begin to think about the question of, do we really need to grow? Some people have mentioned the question of degrowth. If you actually took our national income today and divided it equally among all the, say, 4-person households in this country, we would have enough money in our GDP to give every household $180,000 a year. Our actual median income per household is around $65,000 a year. So we don't, over the next several decades, many decades, even accounting for population growth, we don't need to grow our economy by a single cent in order to maintain living standards in this country. There's a lot of room distributionally to maintain living standards without growing when you look at that gap between potential income per family and what families are actually getting. And of course, this is just one way of looking at our environmental problems. This is a measure of biocapacity crossing the GDP line on a downward trend in about the mid-1990s. So one framework that has experts have developed over the last several decades really is called the Genuine Progress Indicator. And I won't go into any of the technical details about it, but essentially what it does, it looks at 3 domains: economy, environment, and society. And it has about 26 variables, and essentially each variable is either a positive or a negative externality. And so the way the GPI works, it starts with your growth, how much transactions you have in your economy. But it adjusts that growth for the positive and negative externalities. And there are many technical debates about how you put a price on, say, the value of household care in the home. Or the price of ecosystems, and this is an ongoing debate. But what you're doing here is essentially you're adjusting your growth in terms of various dimensions of well-being. And this is the trend since 1950 in the United States when you do that. Already a gap opening up in the 50s and then growing dramatically over the last 30 years. So essentially when I talk to public leaders about this, I describe this: you've got a gap between your growth and the well-being of your people. And it's your job not just to grow the economy, but to start closing that gap, because that's what really matters, is the well-being of your people. And you get a lot of agreement when you describe the problem in that way. So this is the national trend, and most of the work we're doing at DEMOS is at the state level. Federal situation is very difficult right now, but also the states are more interested in it because they outperform the country as a whole in most cases. Maryland was a pioneer in this. They adopted a Genuine Progress Indicator, Governor O'Malley, in 2010. And here's their story. It's not great, but it's better than the US. And actually, more recent studies have shown that they're starting to close the gap. And here is Utah's GPI, just for comparison's sake, because not only are states outperforming the country, but actually there are big differences across states, which are quite interesting. The Utah GPI, which is the second line, is actually better than Maryland's. And they're doing very well primarily because, I didn't know this, but Utah is the most equal state in the country, the most Republican state too, but the most equal state, and inequality is a big adjustment in the GPI. So in the Q&A, I hope that we can get to sort of more of the specific details of what's actually happening on the ground, and I'll tell you about an event that we're having soon that I hope we can get some delegates from this group to attend. But I'm going to leave it at that and leave the sort of implementation story to the Q&A. Thanks for your time and attention. I appreciate it.